Good afternoon, everyone, and we are very excited to have a wonderful program to present to everyone today. To start the program, I would like to invite the president of the University of Clear Lake, Dr. Richard Walker, to come up to the podium and give a warm welcome to our guest.
Thank you, Dr. Dove. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming today. I wanted to come and welcome the Consul General of Ukraine. I think it is very important as an educational institution that we provide opportunities to have dialogue and conversation about what's happening on the world stage. It's part of our charge as an educational institution to provide those opportunities to have those conversations and exchanges of dialogue. So I'm very excited that the Consul General of Ukraine has accepted our invitation from the Diplomacy Institute to join us today in this conversation, and a really important one in this time and what's happening in the world and in Ukraine. So welcome. We thank you for being here and really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. Thank you, President Walker. Good afternoon, or as they would say in Ukrainian, Dobry den, and Slava Ukrainia. This is the Diplomacy Institute's part of their ongoing series of lectures. We see that there's good attendance today. We appreciate those of you that have come out. We will be having several more of these over the course of the remaining year, including next month we will have a special presentation from the India Consul General. So we hope that you will be attending that as well. There's some events scheduled for spring that you won't want to miss. We'll have more about that in due course. But I'd like to thank everybody for attending today. This is a very important issue. The Diplomacy Institute, its mission is to advance diplomacy in all of its forms throughout the world. And so UHCL has sort of garnered a spot in being one of the leaders in trying to promote diplomacy. We certainly need it in this time. The fact that you're here today speaks to your concerns over what's happening in our world. So we hope you will stay engaged with us as we go forward. So thank you, Consul General, for attending today. And now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Daniel Katz, who is coordinator of the Diplomacy Institute. One quick note, we will be having a reception immediately after the Q&A session. By the way, there are cards on the desk for you to write out questions that you may have after listening to the Consul General's speech. But we'll be having a reception where you can talk to him personally immediately after this. It's in the building over on the second floor. My colleague will be happy to give you more information about that. But let me turn the mic over to Dr. Daniel Katz. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Herod. Thank you all for joining us today. And our guest today is the Honorable Vitalii Tarasiuk. Consul General Tarasiuk is joining us amidst a distinguished diplomatic career, currently serves as Consul General of Ukraine in Houston since December of 2021 with a consular district that covers the territorial districts of 7 U.S. states: Arkansas, Colorado, Louisiana, Mississippi, New Mexico, Oklahoma, and Texas. He has previously served as Deputy Director General of the Americas Department at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for Ukraine, where he was responsible for bilateral cooperation with the U.S. and Canada. Previously, he was the Foreign Policy Advisor to the Deputy Prime Minister for European and Euro-Atlantic Integration of Ukraine, and before that, as Minister Counselor, Head of Economic and Trade Office at the Embassy of Ukraine. In this role, he was responsible for organizing all economic activities of the Ukrainian diplomatic mission in the U.S., particularly in the economic sphere. Before this, he served as diplomatic advisor to the Minister of Finance of Ukraine, responsible for bilateral and multilateral international cooperation for the Ministry of Finance, particularly relations with the diplomatic corps accredited in Ukraine and international financial institutions. He's also held positions of First Secretary at the Economic Section at the Embassy of Ukraine, overseeing Ukraine's cooperation with international financial institutions and Ukrainian-American cooperation in the financial and energy sectors, international energy security issues in particular. An earlier portion of his career, he served as the first Secretary of the Americas Department at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and served as first Secretary of the Embassy of Ukraine in the United Kingdom, where he was responsible for the development of bilateral political dialogue between Ukraine and the UK, interparliamentary cooperation, relations with non-governmental organizations and academic institutions. He is a graduate of Kyiv National Economic University, majoring in international economics, and received a master's degree in international economics with a specialty in international investment management. Consul General is married with 2 children. The topic of today's talk will be an update on the current situation of Ukraine's fight against Russian aggression. Without further ado, Consul General.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much to the leadership of University of Houston Clear Lake and to the leadership of Institute of Diplomacy. It's a great honor and a privilege for me to be here and to address you and to talk about Russia's aggression against Ukraine. Well, we are the diplomatic institute, but mostly I'll be speaking about the war. I'll be speaking not about diplomatic efforts, so we will talk about that as well, but I'll give you an update on what's happening with Russia's aggression against Ukraine. But before I start and go into detail describing the current situation on the front line, the diplomatic work that Ukraine is undertaking to make Russia accountable, about the work on the sanctions policy, about the things that we do to be prepared for rehabilitation and rebuilding of Ukraine. I will give you just a few updates. I mean, I think many of you know that the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia started on February 24th of this year. But the aggression against Ukraine started 8 years ago, military aggression. Just the full-scale invasion started in February of this year, but the military aggression started in 2014 with Russia's attempted annexation of Ukrainian Crimea and occupation of certain parts of our eastern regions of Ukraine, Donetsk and Lugansk region. So the war with Russia, the war is happening already for 8 years. It's just that this time around they decided that they would try to occupy the whole country and destroy the whole nation. As you may know, and you have seen a lot of news coverage, especially when the aggression started, even our closest allies, United States, United Kingdom, some friends in Europe, we're not convinced that Ukraine would be able not only to defend itself, but to win this war. If you recollect the first days of Russia's invasion, foreign governments were very supportive of Ukraine's brave response to the Russian invasion, but they still did not believe that Ukraine was able and is able to defend itself against the so-called, as they labeled themselves, second biggest army in the world. But we are already almost at the 8th month of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And now the conversation has completely changed. It's not just now, but it has changed, I think, after Ukrainian military success on the battlefield. We are talking about not whether Ukraine can win this war, but we are talking about the modalities how Ukraine will win this war. It's completely different dialogue happening with our friends and allies. So we can basically, I think, the military aggression divides into 3 stages, I think. And then I will go into detail describing the current situation. is the attempt to occupy the whole country in the beginning of February. It's when Russia attacked Ukraine from different directions. From the north, from the territory of Republic of Belarus, that is Russia's ally and bears the same responsibility as Russia, because the attacks on Ukraine, on the capital, were happening from Belarus. The Belarus forces supply Russian forces. They supply fuel, they support logistics. So that was from the north. And then from the south and from the east, so from all possible directions. And then Ukraine was able to kick the attackers out from the capital of Ukraine. They were not able to take the capital. Within a month of trying, Russia failed to do that. And I should also remind you that at that time, Ukraine did not have any serious military assistance from the West, because when the aggression was started, as I said, nobody really believed that we would be able to defend ourselves. So no serious equipment or armament was provided to Ukraine. So how did we do that? How did we kick the biggest army, one of the biggest armies in the world, out of the capital? The biggest difference is that we have to bear in mind that all of the experts, also, our allies, they overestimated the might and the effectiveness of Russia's military and underestimated Ukrainian one. Because we are in the war with Russia, as I said in the beginning, for almost 8 years already. So most of our officers and soldiers, they've been trained in different military academies in the West. It's a completely different mindset of Ukrainian soldiers than it is of Russian officers, because Russia fights basically the war of the 19th century. It's when all of the decisions are taken by the most high position commander possible. And in Ukraine, when Russia was trying to occupy the capital and the neighboring cities, we implemented the so-called mosquito tactics. So we had a lot of mobile groups that were moving around and were destroying Russia's logistics and destroying them piece by piece. And they could not do anything with these tactics that Ukraine implemented in the beginning. And then the second phase of the war, when they had to move out of the capital, move out from the north of Ukraine, they regrouped, they sent their forces to the east of Ukraine and thought that they would be able to make serious gains consolidating their forces in the east. But that also didn't happen. That was kind of a bit, stalemate situation there, because we still didn't have at that time any serious military supplies. And that we were asking for those, from the beginning of the war, even prior to the war. But that's when the real progress on supplying Ukraine some military assistance started. And then I would say during summertime, we have received the artillery systems so badly needed at the front line. And Ukraine started its counteroffensive first in the north and in the south of Ukraine. And we have liberated in the north of Ukraine and to the east of Ukraine. You can see the map. This is how the map looks almost today. You see, it was prepared by the Institute for War Study of War in Washington, D.C. They do it on a regular basis on their website. You can find the updates on the front line. They're more or less accurate, and you can see the territory in blue. That's what Ukraine, reclaimed after we have received the support from the allies in terms of weapons and ammunition. And this territory, roughly, it's the territory about 10,000 square kilometers. It's a big territory. Some European countries, that's the whole territory that they have. That's a really big territory. I should also remind you that Ukraine is the biggest country in Europe by territory. We are the biggest, bigger than France, bigger than Germany. The population of Ukraine prior to Russia's invasion was about 40 plus million people. So, and now we have as I say, the third stage where we actively counterattack and liberate every day, piece by piece, village by village, the territories taken by Russia in the beginning of its invasion of Ukraine. But unable to gain any serious ground on the battlefield. So what Putin's Russia are trying to do? They've announced demobilization across Russia, trying to conscript as many people as they can. Well, they've announced about 300 million people to be conscripted, but the real numbers are much bigger. They're trying to conscript about 1 million people, but a lot of Russians are fleeing the country, afraid to be mobilized for this war of aggression. And also, at the same time, launched the terrorist tactics of destroying humanitarian. They were doing it from the first day of aggression, but they've intensified sending cruise missiles and rockets, destroying Ukrainian civilian and infrastructure, killing as many people as they can, trying to break Ukraine's resistance, trying to break and destroy as much critical infrastructure as they can, because the winter is coming and they will have in their plans to destroy as many critical infrastructure that would make the winter very difficult for Ukraine. That's what, in terms of military, what's happening in the recent months. But Russia's also conducted fake referendums on the territories that they've captured, and that completely sham referendums. Even calling them referendums is too much, because every city that Ukraine liberates, we find mass graves of people being tortured and killed. So what kind of free will voting we can talk about if population is subdued to tortures, raping, and a lot of population left? So it's a completely sham, not recognized by any country in the world. So, but Russia's attempt to annex the temporarily occupied parts of Ukraine, that's in Donetsk, Lugansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia. You can see the names of those cities on the map. There's no legal consequences. These areas remain integral parts of Ukraine territory, which under any circumstances will be liberated by Ukrainian defenders. World leaders and international organizations strongly condemned the fake referenda held at gunpoint that were used by Russia as false pretext for attempted annexation. These actions clearly violate the UN Charter and international law. Russia's unlawful attempt to annex the territories is a serious aggravation of Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. It has clearly demonstrated that all Kremlin signals of readiness for negotiations were only a cover operation for the armed aggression. The fake referenda and Russia's threat had no effect on the situation on the battlefield. Ukrainian army continues liberating our territories and will not stop until Ukraine's territorial integrity within the internationally recognized borders is restored completely. Mass mobilization, as I mentioned already, and penalties for desertion and voluntary surrender prove that Russia is experiencing enormous challenges to replenish its mounting losses. And the statistics that we have provided by our armed forces is that 64,000 Russian officers and soldiers were killed as of today. Mobilization will not stop Ukraine's counterattacks. Russian occupying troops are focused solely on holding the seized territories, and Ukrainian simultaneous counteroffensives in the east and south continue. So on the territories that we freed, we try to restore the normal life, transport, post offices, social payments, police, supply of water, gas, electricity. Ukrainian defenders have been very effective in using high precision and efficient NATO standard weapons, which allow to counterbalance Russia's numerical superiority. The sooner and the more we receive additional weapons, most notably the long-range ones, the sooner the war will end with our victory. Any peace negotiations would be possible only after complete withdrawal of Russian troops from Ukraine. No negotiations will be held with President Putin, as no talks are ever held with terrorists, and President Zelensky made it clear that after those attempted annexations, Ukraine will not hold any talks with Putin. With another leader in Russia, possibly, after we free our territories, but not with him. No compromises with Kremlin are acceptable. It is necessary to stop the Russia once and for all, to reliably guarantee European and global security. Russian troops continue their acts of state terrorism by delivering missile and artillery attacks, killing civilians and destroying critical civilian infrastructure throughout Ukraine. Iran-supplied drones are used by Russia in the same manner, against civilian targets far away from the front line. And we ask the international community, our partners, United States and in Europe, to impose strict sanctions also on Iran for providing those military drones to Russia. Russia's deliberate attacks on energy and water supply infrastructure are war crimes, aimed at wreaking havoc and undermining Ukraine's resolve to defend. Ukraine urgently needs air defense and anti-missile systems that will protect citizens and civil infrastructure. Russia's missile attacks of 10th and 11th of October were of unprecedented character, hitting 1/3 of Ukraine's energy infrastructure. They have also targeted objects of diplomatic missions of foreign countries in the capital, in Kiev, which is a gross violation of the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations. Russia's attempts to undermine Ukraine's stability and resolve to fight by missile attacks on Ukrainian cities, towns, and villages failed. We will repair all damaged and destroyed objects and continue fighting against invaders. This attack will only further isolate Kremlin and accelerate its defeat. Russia's threats on the possible use of a nuclear weapon are unacceptable. They undermine international peace and security and put the entire world at risk. The world must unequivocally and resolutely condemn them, as well as to take steps to prevent the use of such weapons. Putin's decree of October 5th of transferring control of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant that is being occupied by Russian forces to Russian state company Rosenergoatom has no legal consequences. The plant remains Ukrainian. Russian military must leave the plant and Ukrainian authorities have to regain full control of it. Russia's nuclear industry must be sanctioned to prevent a precedent for other nuclear terrorists in the world. Russia continues its attempts to draw Belarus directly into the war, including by disseminating fakes on Ukraine's plans on military actions against this country. On October 10th, self-proclaimed president of Belarus announced formation of the Union States Regional Grouping of Forces. In order to prevent any provocations, on October 11, President Zelensky proposed to in his statement to the G7 a deployment of a mission of international observers on the Ukrainian-Belarusian border. You may have seen in the news that on September 30th, Ukraine signed an application for accelerated accession to NATO. We are already de facto allies with shared values, common security concerns, and interoperability with the alliance standards proven on the battlefield. The time has come to make it de jure. Ukraine's accession to NATO requires consensus by all member states. As of now, 10 of them have already declared their consent. Until we reach full consensus, Ukraine suggests implementing our proposals on the security guarantees for Ukraine, the so-called Kyiv Security Compact. The purpose of the Kyiv Security Compact is to mobilize necessary political, financial, military, and diplomatic resources for Ukraine's self-defense, both to deter an external aggression and to protect Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity if such aggression takes place in the future. Security guarantees will include two key elements. First, the joint strategic partnership document named the Kyiv Security Compact, co-signed by a core group of partners. Second, additional bilateral and regional agreements, which can be of different character depending on the respective country's readiness to implement different steps. Guarantees territorial scope applies through Ukraine's international recognized borders. Strong security guarantees are necessary, in particular for ensuring economic recovery of Ukraine, safe return of Ukrainian refugees, and massive foreign investments to rebuild the destruction brought by Russia's aggression. As of today, nearly 1/5 of Ukraine's territory remains occupied by Russia. In the recently occupied areas, Russia reproduces the same patterns it has been using in Crimea and parts of Donbass since 2014. Appoints occupation administration, imposes Russian passports and Russian legislation. Responding to Ukrainian counteroffensive progress, Russian occupation administration is further restricting the movement of civilians across the occupied areas, and especially out of them to the Ukrainian government-controlled territories, basically holding people hostages there. Following the illegal attempted annexation of the newly occupied parts of Ukraine, Russia started their integration into the political field. United Russia Party announced establishment of regional party branches and forces public employees to join its ranks. To ensure economic integration of the temporarily occupied territories, Occupation Administration imposes Russian ruble, opens branches of Russian banks, demands local businesses to register and pay taxes under Russian law, issues Russian model car license plates and driver's licenses. Education in Russian and according to the Russian standards is being introduced as part of wider brainwashing campaign aimed at strengthening occupational control and the elimination of Ukrainian identity. Many active schools are used by Russian forces as human shields. Russia terminated Ukrainian TV and radio broadcasting, replaced Ukrainian mobile operators, internet and fixed telephony services by those controlled by Russia. While destroying civilian infrastructure and blocking evacuation of civilians from the occupied territories to the government-controlled parts of Ukraine, Kremlin practices forcible deportation of Ukrainian citizens to the territory of Russia. More than 1.6 million people, as we counted, were deported to Russia forcefully. Children from the occupied territories are transferred to Russia and legally given up for adoption. The forcible transfer of children of one group to another with intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnical, racial or religious group is a violation of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. And I just basically quoted how it is in the convention. Kidnappings and abductions are increasingly taking place in the occupied territories. Local residents are subjected to the so-called filtration camps, in which families are separated and those who are deemed unreliable, they disappear. We expect international organizations to do everything possible to gain access to such places of detention and force Russia to comply with the relevant conventions. In connection with the partial mobilization, as Putin calls it, Russia, as the occupying state, violating the norms of humanitarian law, conducts it in the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine. Russia forcibly sends mobilized Ukrainians to the war zone and forces them to fight against their fellow citizens. The mobilization campaign in Crimea targets specifically Crimean Tatars, indigenous people of Crimea, who have proved to be non-loyal towards the occupying administration. The number of Crimean Tatars among those who are planned for the mobilization is approximately 27%. On September 21st, the occupying administration in Crimea issued the shameful sentences. The first deputy head of the Mejlis of Crimean Tatar people, Nariman Jalal, as well as brothers, to 17, 15, and 13 years in prison. And Mejlis is a Crimean Tatars parliament. It's not an official body, just like the consulting body of Crimean Tatar people. Ukraine has officially informed the International Court of Justice that Russia's attempted annexation of parts of Ukraine's territory blatantly violates the ICJ legally binding order on provisional measures issued on 16th of March. Russia uses artillery and missiles to destroy Ukraine. Ukrainian law enforcement agencies registered damage or destruction of almost 50,000 civilian infrastructure facilities, including almost 40,000 residential buildings and houses, roads and bridges, almost 2,000 educational and 360 medical institutions, 377 cultural and 82 religious buildings, and almost 5,000 water and electricity networks. These numbers do not include the occupied territories to which we do not have access. The real level of destruction is much higher. Vast areas of Ukraine are mined. Environmental damage in Ukraine caused by Russia's war is estimated at around $35 billion. Russian troops systematically violate the norms of international humanitarian law and international human rights law in Ukraine. Deliberate and indiscriminate attacks on civilians, their use as hostages and human shield, execution and rapes, forceful conscription and kidnapping, attacks on medical personnel and facilities, use of banned weapons, and other things as well. In the liberated areas, bodies of dead civilians were revealed, many of them showing signs of torture and brutality. Russia's occupation leaves only death and destruction in Ukrainian cities, towns, and villages. Russian occupation authorities prevent UN officials from visiting Ukrainian prisoners of war, while the UN has documented instances of torture, poor treatment, lack of food, water, health care, and sanitation in the sites in which they are held, as well as absence of contact with their families. Russia must strictly adhere to the provisions of international humanitarian law and stop using Ukrainian prisoners of war for its own political purposes. We expect the international organizations, in particular the ICRC, to condemn Russia's actions and urge it to stop violations. Kremlin must ensure access of the UN fact-finding missions to Olenivka, in which Russia committed on July 29 a terrorist act, killing more than 50 Ukrainian prisoners of war. Eventually, all Russian perpetrators committing war crimes and crimes against humanity will be held accountable. This is a matter of principle. Ukrainian law enforcement agencies have launched investigation into almost 40,000 war crimes and crimes of aggression committed since February 24th. These cases are investigating the killing of civilians and killing of children, and the recent statistics, and it's not the number that reflects the real situation, is that more than 422 children were killed by the Russian aggression. And the wounding of civilians, these figures growing daily. They do not take into account the occupied territories to which law enforcement officials do not have access for now. We urge every state to consider joining a special tribunal initiated by Ukraine to punish Russian military and political leadership for its crime of aggression. On October 7th, the Ukrainian parliament adopted an appeal to the international community on the need to establish such a tribunal. Russia must be legally and politically recognized as a state sponsor of terrorism, and Russian armed forces recognized as a terrorist organization. Such decision would further isolate Russia, cutting political and economic ties it would otherwise maintain. No neutral stance on Russia's war of aggression is appropriate. We call on all countries across the globe to state clearly that this war is unacceptable. Neutrality would only encourage Russia to continue its aggression against Ukraine and blackmail the world by energy and food crisis. Russia's war against Ukraine is also a campaign of genocide aimed at annihilating Ukrainians as a nation. The investigations into the crime of genocide are being conducted. At the same time as we fight the war, we are preparing for the economic recovery of Ukraine. We recover what we can as soon as we liberate the cities. But of course, after the Ukrainian victory, there'll be a need for a full-scale and large reconstruction project to support Ukraine. The cost of Ukraine's reconstruction and recovery needs due to Russia's war of aggression, according to the report jointly presented on September 9th by the government of Ukraine, the European Commission, and the World Bank, estimated that the amount of destruction and the need for reconstruction is at the level of $349 billion as of today. High resources are needed to recover the liberated territories of Ukraine, from which Russian troops continue to retreat, leaving behind destroyed infrastructure. Millions of Ukrainians lost their homes and became IDPs. As the winter period is approaching, we welcome any assistance with ensuring accommodation for them, such as temporary housing and repairs of the damaged and destroyed infrastructure. The generous financial and technical international assistance is warmly welcomed, and up to date, Ukraine, since the aggression on February 24th, has received close to $20 billion of different financial and technical assistance. It is the best investment in the safety and long-term well-being of families in Europe and beyond. Grants are high priority for Ukraine, as Ukraine should not bear the increased debt burden being in defensive war. For the next year, Ukraine will need roughly $38 billion to cover the state budget deficit. Nearly half of the state budget will be directed to the security and defense sector. Following suspension of all EU import duties for Ukrainian products, Ukraine export to the European Union in the first 3 quarters of 2022 exceeded the level of the last year by 6%, even despite the ongoing Russia's war of aggression. Since October 1st, so-called customs visa-free regime entered into force. Post-war Ukraine will be an indispensable part of the European economy. Further trade, transport, and energy liberalization will be a critical element of post-war recovery of Ukraine. We expect the decisions taken in this regard by the European Union, United Kingdom, Canada, and the United States and Australia to remain in place after the end of the war. You may have heard in the news a lot discussions about grain going from Ukraine, or actually first not going from Ukraine because of the blocked ports by Russian military in the Black Sea, and that started to cause a real serious problem for a lot of countries in Asia and in Africa that were buying Ukrainian grain and were depending on that. Not many people knew that Ukraine is among top 10 countries in the world that sustain the world's food security by providing supplying grain to the market. The grain corridor was established by the initiative on the safe transportation of grain and foodstuffs from Ukrainian ports It still continues to function well. Since its start, 325 vessels with 7.2 million tons of food left Ukrainian ports to the countries of Asia, Europe, and Africa. And that's statistics for the beginning of this week. The resumed export of Ukrainian food is already stabilizing the global market, decreasing prices and reducing chaos caused by lack of food around the world. Russia's statements that Ukrainian agricultural products are directed only to European countries are fake. Ukraine continues working with the UN World Food Programme to increase the amount of food sent to the countries which need it most. On 2nd of October, the fifth bulk carrier under this program arrived to the port of Chernomorsk to be further sent to Somalia. We expect all countries to refrain from buying food stolen by Russia from the occupied parts of Ukraine. Vessels must be banned from entering seaports or detained and arrested by the respective national governments, and companies involved in such trade must be sanctioned. So here we go to the sanctions. Escalation brought by Russia's attempted annexation of parts of Ukraine's territory deserves proper response. Restrictive measures on Russia must be significantly increased. We welcome the 8th European Union sanctions package adopted on 6th of October, which introduces new import bans worth 7 billion euros and export restrictions, lays a legal basis for the price cap on Russian oil, and extends geographical scope of sanctions to the Russia-occupied parts of Zaporizhia and Kherson regions. Russia's fossil fuel remains its main source of financing the war of aggression against Ukraine. The reliance on them must be ended. Price cap for gas needs to be introduced as well. Russia's attacks against energy sector of Ukraine and entire Europe must be followed by a symmetrical response. Trade ties with Russia should be severed as much as possible, as they are actively used by Kremlin as a tool of pressure. Restricting Russia's access to maritime transportation would further undermine an export-oriented economy. Strengthening sanctions is also necessary to ensure that Russia is not able to manufacture and maintain high-tech weapons containing many components supplied by NATO countries. Russian army already feels the consequences of the lost access to Western technologies. The war led by Kremlin is widely supported by the Russian society, unfortunately, which shares responsibility for it. The European Union member states agreed to suspend the visa facilitation agreement with Russia. Since September 30th, Finland joined Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland to suspend the entry of Russian citizens. For those of them who really need protection from being persecuted in Russia, there remain well-known legal mechanisms: refugee status, asylum requests, etc. In order to synchronize sanctions with our partners, on 30th of September, the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine adopted a decision to impose restrictive measures on significant individuals, nearly 1,300 persons and legal entities of Russia involved in the aggressive steps against Ukraine and the community of democratic nations. The legal way to confiscate Russia's frozen foreign exchange reserves and assets abroad to be further used for compensations to Ukraine and Ukrainian citizens has to be found. Because Russia has to bear consequences for the war of destruction and aggression against the nation, against the Ukrainian nation. As of today, about $400 billion were frozen in the banks abroad that belong to Russian government. And our position is clear. Those money has to be confiscated and sent to Ukraine for us to be able to rebuild all of the destruction caused by this invasion. Any lifting of sanctions has to be agreed with Ukraine, and only after Ukraine liberates its territories and Russia starts to comply, starts to behave as a partner going by the rules of the international community. So this is basically, in a number of dimensions, the situation that currently Ukraine is going through. We will definitely win this war of aggression because Ukrainian people are united. The whole free world, democratic world, is also united behind Ukraine. And there is no way how Russia can win this war of aggression against Ukraine. So there are lots of ways how ordinary citizens across the globe can help and support Ukrainian people in their fight for freedom. Because we are fighting not only for our freedom, we are fighting for the current global world order that is based on the rules, principles, and democracy. Because if, let's imagine, Ukraine is not successful in this fight, it's not possible right now, but in the beginning of the war, that would send very bad signal to other dictators across the world that such behavior is acceptable and that the world will tolerate things like that, and that would basically allow them to do similar such things in their regions as well. So Ukraine is Ukraine basically is the front line of the world's democracy right now. So supporting Ukraine is not just supporting Ukrainian people in our fight for our freedom, but supporting the freedom and democracy in the world. There are many ways how you can support, locally or internationally. When we came to Houston last year in December, we came here to open a consulate to do business. But since this war of aggression started, our consulate mostly works as a humanitarian organization. We collect different types of supplies. We launched Texas law enforcement initiative with Houston police, where they provide us bulletproof vests, helmets, medical kits, and we send it to the defenders of Ukraine. Also, there are different organizations that collect medical supplies and pharmaceuticals and send it to Ukraine. There is a locally based here Medical Bridges organization that many of you may know. Project Cure, it's an organization that works across the United States, but the Houston branch is very active because of the big medical center in Houston, and we work actively with them. But just ordinary citizens, they sometimes buy something, collect something that they think may be needed, like medical kits that could be easily bought on Amazon, and they send it to Ukraine. It's unimaginable, but Consul General of Ukraine, we have a warehouse. It's not normal for a consul to have a warehouse, but we do, because that's where we collect things and we ship it to Ukraine. There are government websites collecting funds and resources. President of Ukraine, Zelensky, launched a special website. It's called United 24. And it's very easy to navigate and operate, and you can easily find it if you're interested, where you can make donations that will go either to humanitarian assistance of Ukraine, to support armed forces of Ukraine, or to support rebuilding of Ukraine. And this website posts on a weekly basis reports how many they have received, what have been bought, where it has been sent. So it's very transparent. You can see it for yourself. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you for being interested to listen, to learn more about what's happening in Ukraine. I'm ready to answer any questions that you may have in the Q&A part of our meeting today. Thank you so much.
So you should have some note cards in front of you, and so we will collect those and pass them along. While we're doing that, I guess I can start the questioning. You've answered so many of my questions that I had prepared, which is a good thing and a bad thing. So let me just focus on a couple of these. We're doing a round robin. I'll ask one, and then my colleague will ask one. But how should the world respond in the event that the Russians decide to use nuclear weapons? And this is a sad thing to have to say, but does Ukraine regret relinquishing its nuclear arsenal after the breakup of the Soviet Union and Ukrainian independence? So that's always been in the back of my mind. Would they be doing this if you had fully functioning nuclear weapons? And I don't know the answer to that. But I'd be interested to hear your opinion.
Thank you so much for this question. It's a very good question, but it has a couple of dimensions here, right? So let's just, I think, if we start from the past, whether we regret relinquishing one of the biggest nuclear arsenals in the world, well, there's no point of being sad about it, or because what's done is done. There was a lot of talks about that. I think we do not regret giving the nuclear arsenal away. I think we more regret that the Budapest Memorandum that was signed as a security guarantees for Ukraine appeared to be just a piece of paper and not a legally binding document. I think that's more important than giving away the arsenal, because back then Ukraine believed that the security guarantors of Ukraine would protect Ukraine in case of aggression.
Yes.
And then when aggression started in 2014, we found out, surprisingly, that it doesn't have any legally binding obligations from the countries that signed it. And Russia being one of them, United Kingdom, the United States. So we may say that, to a certain extent, that some of the parties, like United Kingdom and United States, are trying to implement the, I would say, the spirit of a memorandum by supporting Ukraine now. But let's just remind ourselves that the aggression against Ukraine started in 2014, and we did not receive any weapons or any support when it started. So, talking about Russia's blackmail and blackmail of threatening the world of using nuclear weapons. Well, this is the last resort that Russian authorities are reverting to right now, using the nuclear blackmail, because they are unable to do anything on the battlefield. They are not able, when basically threatening the world with nuclear weapon, that's basically admitting that they've already lost the conventional war. Basically, direct admittance from the government of Russia. I don't think it is likely. I think it's mostly blackmail, but we cannot be 100% sure. But look, there are so many other things connected with that. First, if we ever, by we, I mean not even Ukraine, but the world community, would agree to a nuclear weapon blackout, all of us will be living in a completely different world almost like next day. Because that will open a Pandora box for other nations to use it. You do this, or I will be nuclear. That's not acceptable. And the world community made it clear. The leaders of the United States and Europe made it clear that the nuclear blackmail is not acceptable. But then, if even think about it from the military perspective, the use of a tactical nuclear weapon can give certain advantage on a battlefield. Basically, it creates an opening that should be then used by conventional forces that Russia doesn't have. So it doesn't make any sense. Even if we just for a second will think that it's been used in Ukraine, it will not give Russia any advantage. On the other hand, such countries as China or India, who still try to be kind of like neutral, to stay a little bit aside of that, would have to leave and abandon such a state as Russia that uses nuclear weapons. And this is the end for Putin's regime. If China or India stop buying Russian goods or start trading with them, this is completely the end, because this is the last two, I think, markets have left for Russian goods in the world. So looking at that from different, dimensions, I would say that this is not likely.
We have a question from the audience. Other than Russia's veto power in the Security Council, what is preventing the UN from taking more definitive action in Ukraine, including in the economic or peacekeeping realms?
Well, that's a very good question, because I think most experts would agree that the reform of the United Nations as an organization is long overdue. Because this organization was created for the sole purpose of preventing things like Russia's aggression against Ukraine. And aggression happened 8 years ago by one of the Security Council members. And for 8 years, nothing was done. Nothing. So definitely, and you may have heard, I think President Biden was speaking at the UN General Assembly this September, and other leaders as well, that they are advocating for a serious and big reform of the UN as an organization. I would also draw your attention to the fact that recently the General Assembly voted a resolution on Ukraine's territorial integrity after those fake referendums happened in Ukraine. And more than just 143 countries of members voted in support of it. You should also know that this resolution is not just a usual resolution of General Assembly. This is a special resolution that the General Assembly was convened for that very purpose, to have this voting. So basically, it allows to act on this resolution even if the Security Council is not supporting it. It gives a broader rights and authorities to the UN to act more actively in Ukraine based on this resolution voted just a couple of weeks ago. So, but whether they will be able to do that or not, Ukrainian diplomats are working very actively at UN, but UN is a very big bureaucratic organization, and things move very slowly there.
Okay, a couple of questions from the audience. This one may be a little uncomfortable, but I'll make a quick comment on it afterwards. But I'll just read it because it did come from the audience. The
Battalion
on neo-Nazis in Ukraine has been targeting Ukrainians since 2014, as reported by the New York Times and other various journalists. While Ukraine is fighting Russia, what is Ukraine doing to ensure the Azov Battalion is not basically harming Ukrainians who are still living in Ukraine as the conflict continues? We've heard that cited by Russia as the reason for part of the reason for invasion, which is absolute nonsense. But the threat of Nazis, we have, of course, unfortunately, neo-Nazi groups in this country. But I'll let you respond to that particular question.
Well, I mean, the simple answer to this question, please, don't use as a source of your information Russian propaganda media resources. That's the simplest answer. Because, well, do we have in Ukraine certain groups that have nationalistic agenda. Yeah, we do, like in the United States as well, but they do not represent the Ukrainian society at all. Ukrainian people have elected 2 years ago a Jewish president,
Yes.
and he's very popular in Ukraine. Previous administration that was under the Poroshenko president, we had prime minister Jewish, Mr. Groisman. So there is no in Ukraine any support for nationalist movement of ultra-right kind. So I would just be more careful when you read the news and try to compare it with different sources of information before you make your mind on something. Thank you.
Another member of our audience indicated that prior to February 24th, U.S. satellite imagery showed the buildup of Russian forces, and U.S. warned that the world community of an impending attack. The initial Ukrainian reaction was public denial that invasion would occur. Was this a miscalculation on the part of Ukrainian preparations?
Well, thank you for this question, but the fact is that we should go a little bit back in time. Not much, but a little bit back, because the build-up of Russian forces around Ukraine happened first in April 2020. That's when the first build-up happened. And forces, about 120,000 Russian forces, they have never left. They were there since April 2020, trying to pressure the world leaders and Ukraine into some kind of surrender of Ukrainian foreign policy agenda. So they were using it as a pressure for almost a year. So we knew everything that was happening around our borders, either from our intelligence services, also from our partners in the United States, mostly. And we were being prepared. We just didn't raise alarm before it started happening because, as I said, the troops were there for almost a year already by the time aggression started. So Ukrainian forces were being prepared, and we just didn't have those negotiations through the television. We were having discussions privately with our allies. And I can tell you that because I was one of those who was doing that, being the Director General for the Americas Department. So all of those negotiations with the US were going all the time. We were asking for imposing sanctions not after invasion starts, but before, to prevent it, and to provide Ukrainian weapons not after invasion will start, but before, to be able to defend ourselves. But unfortunately, most of our allies thought that if they do that, that will provoke Russia for the aggression. So that was the main difference that we had from Ukraine and our partners.
Okay, another audience question. The belief that children are the future is particularly relevant for Ukraine between the war and its associated impacts. For Ukrainian children, are there plans being developed to address their emotional, social, and educational needs? And what is the nation's plan for children who have lost a parent or both parents and or close relatives after the war is won?
Well, of course, I could not agree more, because children is the future, and Ukraine fights for the future of our children to be able to live in a free and democratic society, to be able to freely choose what they want for themselves. And of course, we try to protect children as much as we can. This year, on September 1st, Ukraine resumed the school year in Ukraine. So the schools opened in Ukraine for the kids that are in Ukraine. And the schools that have bomb shelters, only those are allowed to operate. Those that do not have are not able until they have them. So because the protection of the kids is the most important thing for all of the people, for people and for authorities alike. Yes, there are different programs supported by the government, but of course, the more support from international community is needed to have the enough financial resources to support those programs. Some of the programs are carried even by the First Lady of Ukraine, Olena Zelenska. There are others supported by different non-profit organizations. So there are a lot of programs like that, but they can never be enough. So when we talk about kids, they can never be enough. There's always something that can be done. So if some of you are interested in supporting an orphanage or kids in Ukraine, please contact us. We will get you in touch.
Just this week, the leader of Ukraine's Defense Intelligence Agency projected significant victories for Ukraine by the end of this year and a conclusion to the conflict by next summer. This assessment included an intention to return to Ukraine's 1991 borders and confidence that Russia would not utilize nuclear weapons. In addition to the military dimension that you laid out, what role will diplomacy play in these upcoming months to ensure a successful resolution to the conflict?
Well, I'm not in the business of predictions, and I don't have a crystal ball. I can't tell you when the war will end, how the war will end, but I can tell you what is the aim, the goal, not only of the government, but of the whole society, is the full liberation of the whole Ukraine, of all territories occupied by Russia, not only after February 24th, but also after 2014. Crimea included and the eastern parts of Ukraine as well. So for us, this is the goal. This is how we see the end of the goal. Full liberation of the territories that were taken from us. Diplomacy, I've mentioned in my presentation that Ukraine applied for, we already have a status of a candidate country for European Union. We have applied for NATO membership as well on September 30th. But we understand that this is a long process. And sometimes I'm being asked when we meet with government officials, so you've applied to NATO membership. Does it mean that if we take Ukraine in, that NATO would have to fight with Russia? So our answer is very simple. We understand that this is a long road to NATO membership. So by the time Ukraine will be a NATO member, Ukraine will win this war. So there will be no fighting with Russia. At the time, Ukraine will be really close to becoming a member of NATO. So that's why I mentioned in my presentation, understanding that this is a process. Ukrainian diplomacy proposed a security pact, basically legally binding, because we had, as I mentioned today, our experience about non-legally binding security guarantee documents before. So this time around, it has to be legally binding. We have proposed this. Actually, it was worked with a group of experts. One of the leading experts on this group is Mr. Rasmussen, former Secretary of NATO. He was behind the elaboration of this creation of this document. As mentioned in my presentation, that envisages collective security guarantees for Ukraine and then bilateral security guarantees country by country. And then the parliaments of those countries would have to vote on those security guarantees in their parliaments to be legally binding. So that's as an interim proposal until Ukraine gets to NATO. But maybe I'll just say a few words about the Ukraine's armed forces. By supporting right now Ukrainian armed forces, the world, United States and Europe, basically investing in their own security. Because right now, the Ukrainian army is the strongest, the most trained, the most capable army in Europe. And even after Ukraine's victory over Russia's invasion and aggression, Ukrainian army will remain the biggest, the strongest, and the most capable army. We never know whether such aggression will happen in the future or not, but I think it is safe to assume it is very likely. So having a very proficient and trained army on the borders of the European Union and NATO members, I think serves to the benefit of European continent the most. So by providing weapons to Ukrainian army right now, Europe and the United States are not doing humanitarian assistance by helping Ukraine. They're investing in European security in the future.
So
Another audience question, this one from one of our Diplomacy Institute board members, Dr. McMullen. I'm going to embellish it a little bit. It's a good question.
when the war is over,
How big
the
a
challenge
will be to, one, get Ukrainian citizens back from Russia? I'm hearing that tens of thousands have been possibly carried off. We don't, I mean, obviously the numbers are fluid, but it's scary. And the second part, though, deal with Russians
that have been
settled since 2014, actually before that, in Crimea and other Ukrainian territory. I mean, Crimea is a
big problem
in the sense that if I remember the history correctly, I think it was 1941, Stalin forcibly deported Crimean Tatars. They were a significant portion of the country, and spread them throughout the rest of the then Soviet Union. And basically,
basically settled it.
they deported people, and there's migration. So they
now
constitute probably the majority of Crimea in terms of just ethnicity. This is a problem, and I envision
that was
part of the plan for the rest of Ukraine, especially the three regions in question. I'll let you answer that. I mean, this is very tough.
No, it's not a question.
Oh, good.
It's an easy question. So, look, there is no problem of Crimea. Yeah, if we, when Ukraine, let's switch that not from Crimea, but from the getting Ukrainians back from Russia. By the time we win, I can safely imagine that there will be another leadership in Russia.
I hope so.
Well, I think it's obvious for Putin to lose the war of his making aggression against Ukraine would seriously damage the support not only in Russia for Putin, but also in the Putin's circle, I would say as well. They will search for somebody else to replace him, and we already see um, such trends happening deeply inside Russia. So I think by the time Ukraine wins, we will be able to get all of our people back because right now they are deported and physically kept inside Russia, and even right now with this leadership of the country, Ukraine is able to get Ukrainians back. We weekly try to have these exchanges, and we return Ukrainian soldiers and the civilians that were captured by the Russian occupying forces. We regularly try to get and are getting back children that were forcibly deported to Russia. So this is happening even now. So when then Russia will be a different regime and when we win this war, I think things will be moving faster in terms of getting our people back. Yes, you're right. In 1941, Stalin deported a large number of Crimean Tatars from Crimea. But then, in the 1991, 1992, when the Soviet Union was collapsing, at the end of the collapse of the Soviet Union, many of Crimean Tatars have returned to Crimea. Some of them are still there under the Russian occupation. Some have left and stayed very close to the Crimea in the south of the Ukraine, being able to return as soon as the situation allows. And those Russians that came to Crimea after it was annexed from Ukraine, they will just leave Crimea when we will be liberating it. Simple as that. There's no problem with that. You can see when the Crimean bridge was blown a couple of weeks ago. How many Russians wanted to leave Crimea if that?
You alluded to this in your presentation, but Russia has continued to target Ukrainian infrastructure, which has led to major blackouts, and as you said, destruction almost 30% or more of the power stations in Ukraine. Beyond the provision of air defense systems, which Ukraine has requested, what else can the international community do to support Ukraine, particularly in these winter months when the needs will be particularly urgent for the civilian population?
Thank you. This is a very good question. That this is the work that all of our diplomatic missions are doing across the globe, talking to the business communities that can provide Ukraine with necessary equipment to substitute the one that was destroyed, different kind of generators that are needed for households and for industrial use as well. And if any of you can help us with that, we would be grateful. If you could, refer to us, we can provide you with a list of equipment that we are looking for. Of course, most of it is in Europe, but if you have or know people that may have access to that, we would be grateful. This is the work that we are doing here. But Ukrainian people have very high spirit, even in spite of all of the bad things, atrocities happening across the country. There is a joke going around in Ukraine right now when a lot of energy facilities, infrastructure were destroyed, and some parts of Ukraine were in the dark for a certain period of time. So Ukrainians were joking and saying, so if Putin will switch off the lights in Ukraine, in the end, we'll just have more Ukrainians.
Okay, another audience question. I understand contextually what the question is trying to ask is that it says, how can citizens of the USA fight misinformation regarding the use of aid funds provided by the USA? And the context of the question is, there's some social media sites that say, Ukrainian elites are profiting off of. You've answered part of this, and then it says, USA is dependent on, which is true, on public support, and some USA members of Congress may weaponize this aid for their own agendas, which is absolutely happened. How do you answer that? Well, those allegations are just not true because, those allegations do not provide any proof of such things happening. So this basically has, some people saying that have their political agenda. It's either Russian propaganda, misinformation, spread, trying to, limit the support that Ukraine receives from our friends and allies across the whole world. And some politicians use it during the election cycle. So there is no substantial things to discuss here. If there are any facts and people have, facts to prove such allegations, they should bring it up, and we will investigate and we'll make sure such things not happening. But responding just to allegations that is not proven by any facts, I think, doesn't make any sense.
Well, I have one last question from the audience, and it's appropriate given that, given the context of where we are. What do university students do to continue their studies now?
Well, as I said, schools have opened since September, and universities as well opened from September. So the requirement is the same. They have places where students can hide during the rates. Then those students, this number of students can attend physically the university. Otherwise, the other part, they study online. And, 2 years of COVID have, taught us all how, that can be done. So it's done like a little bit virtually, a little bit physically. So even for students that have left Ukraine with their relatives, if they're like 17 and they left the first year of the university, they continue studying in their universities online. So the studies, of course, it has disrupted greatly the educational process, but we do as much as we can to restore the normal educational process.
Good. Well, we want to be respectful of the Consul
Consul
General's
General's time, so we
Thank you,
Consul
Consul.
General for today, and so we have a resolution.
I want to thank the audience for their attendance and their very good